So Fareed Zakaria made an ass of himself talking about the issue of Venezuela and Russia. Take a look.
Estimates of Russia's total investment in Venezuela vary from $20 to $25 billion. The Venezuelan gambit appears to be personally significant for Russia's President Vladimir Putin. In recent years, as the Venezuelan economy has tanked and political instability has grown, even most Russian companies have abandoned the country, viewing it as too risky. But as Vladimir Ruvinsky writes in a Wilson Center report, Russian state-controlled oil giant Rosneft, which has close ties to Putin, has persisted and even ramped up its support for Maduro. In other words, Putin is all in with his support for Maduro. He is doing this in part to prop up an old ally and because it adds to Russia's clout in global oil markets, but above all, because it furthers Putin's central foreign policy objective, the formation of a global anti-American coalition of countries that can frustrate Washington's purposes and usher in a more multipolar world. Putin's efforts seem designed to taunt the United States, which announced the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, warning foreign powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. The big question for Washington is, will it allow Moscow to make a mockery of another American red line? The U.S. and Russia have taken opposing, incompatible stands on this issue. And as with Syria, there is a danger that if Washington does not back its words with deeds, a year from now, we will be watching the consolidation of the Maduro regime supported by Russian arms and money. The administration has been tough on Russian involvement in Venezuela. Trump himself has even declared Russia has to get out. But that is an unusual sentiment from Trump, who has almost never criticized Vladimir Putin and often sided with Russia on matters big and small. As former ambassador to Moscow, Michael McFaul has written, Trump has a remarkably consistent pattern of supporting Putin's foreign policy goals. Trump has threatened to withdraw from NATO and has announced the removal of American troops from Syria. He has publicly disagreed with his own intelligence community's conclusion that Moscow meddled with the 2016 elections.
President Putin, he just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
Now, I have never alleged collusion or conspiracy between Russia and Trump, writing merely that we should wait to see what evidence Robert Mueller presented. But the real puzzle remains. Why has Trump been unwilling to confront Putin in any way on any issue? And will Venezuela finally be the moment when Trump ends his appeasement?
Fareed Zakaria needs to come out, issue an apology, and correct the record. Because what he said there is not just wrong, it's not just demonstrably wrong, it's one of the single most untrue things I've heard on cable news in the past year, and that includes Fox News. What he's doing is arguing from a narrative and not arguing based on the evidence and the facts. He just said Trump, never stands up to Russia and his policies are the opposite of that. Listen, man, I'm going to answer his question directly. And he should be addressing this stuff, because if you fancy yourself a journalist or a reporter and you're on CNN and you're doing a segment where you are purporting to show information to the world, this is unacceptable and inexcusable. What has Donald Trump done that are anti-Russian policies? Let's see. He armed Ukrainian rebels who are currently fighting Russia, and by the way, many of them have neo-Nazi ties. That is directly against what Vladimir Putin and the Russian government want. Directly against what they want. In fact, it's so against what they want, Barack Obama refused to do that policy because he said it was a needless escalation with Russia, and why would we want to escalate with another nuclear-armed power? He's already wrong, by the way. Fareed Zakaria has already been debunked, but I'll continue. He's done a NATO buildup on Russia's border. That's also not what Putin and Russia wants. He sent warships to the Black Sea. Not what Putin and Russia wants. He did the head fake about getting out of Syria, but we're not getting out of Syria. He has since announced we're staying in Syria, and we're doing a permanent occupation of Syria, Putin's top ally. That's not what Putin and the Russian government want. He's been yelling at Angela Merkel in Germany to axe a Russian oil deal that they have, because he wants to do the oil deal with Germany instead. So he wants to take business from Putin and the Russian government and give it to the U.S. That's the opposite of what they want. He also has not approved an Exxon oil deal that was supposed to go through with Russia. He axed a multi-billion-dollar Exxon oil deal that was supposed to go through with Russia, U.S. companies and Russia. Again, not what Putin wants. Look at what we've already done in Venezuela. Massively against what Putin wants. And then, of course, pulling out of the nuke treaty. The opposite of what Russia wants. So when Fareed Zakaria says this, he is just wrong. And he's feeding into this Red Scare McCarthyite narrative of, tut, Mr. President, you better show the world you're not Putin's puppet. And how does he do that, Fareed Zakaria? Be more hawkish. Be more hawkish, escalate further, go to the brink of war with Russia over Venezuela. Do you guys not see now how this is insanely dangerous, what's going on? That now the only way for Donald Trump to prove I'm not Putin's puppet is to keep escalating and be more hawkish and more hawkish and more hawkish, which is dangerous. You know how the left is supposed to resist? They're supposed to go in the other direction and say, Mr. President, I want you to sit down and make peace with this other nuclear-armed country. But if you were to do that, everybody would say, aha, Putin's puppet. What a deranged situation that we're in. And by the way, Russiagate will not die. It refuses to die. There was a story that broke last night. New York Times originally reported it. Washington Post backed it up. And they say that some people on Mueller's team are saying Barr's summary was not totally accurate. That's what the New York Times report says. Now, did they name anybody? No. And again, they put the word some. Some of the people on Mueller's team say this is not accurate. Now, Washington Post steps in, and what do they say? It has to do more with the obstruction charge than anything. So, in other words, the findings on obstruction were like, he kind of did it, but we're not going to be proactive in doing anything about that. We're just going to say he kind of did it. This is my guess as to what's in there. But, again, the main charge of collusion, nothing. So now everybody's melting down and they're doing their one last, because, how many times have we seen these stories where they're like, the walls are closing in. Is this the beginning of the end when it comes to Trump's presidency over Russia? How many times have bombshell, walls are closing in, beginning of the end, bombshell, walls are closing in, beginning of the end. This is like the last gasp of those efforts. And they're trying to imply, like, see, Barr's summary was totally off base. When, again, the reality is, on obstruction, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Barr biased it more towards, like, yeah, nothing's going to happen here over obstruction. But according to some sources on Mueller's team, it was not exonerating him on obstruction by any stretch of the imagination. But again, that begs the question. Obstruction, but if there's no collusion and he's obstructing, people are arguing, well, what if there was no original crime, then how could you say he's obstructing? How's he obstructing justice if there was no original crime? Now, the response is that legally speaking, there doesn't have to be an original crime for you to obstruct justice. So technically, you can get him on a technicality in that sense. But again, the new reports are not, there's no indication that he actually did collusion. The indications are, well, what we all thought was obstruction when we saw it, when he fired Comey, for example. He did like 8 things that reasonable people could say, yeah, that appears like obstruction of justice. So apparently the report does not like exonerate him on obstruction, but on collusion, there's no evidence and they can't proceed on that. But now we're seeing like another story being blown out of proportion. And this is my main concern. This is what I'm most afraid of, is that we have this political climate now where people like Fareed Zakaria, who otherwise, you could think he's somewhat reasonable, but now he's partaking in, honestly, what is a caricature. Like, this is the quintessential example of the shit that I've been worried about, which is a media climate where they're literally cheerleading Donald Trump to be more hawkish. And my response to this is, no, dude. The original instinct of everybody in the country of, oh my God, this guy's a thin-skinned lunatic buffoon, that is true. And if somebody's a thin-skinned lunatic buffoon, the last thing you want to do is prod them to be more hawkish. I want to prod them to be more in favor of peace. So it's bad. And Fareed Zakaria shouldn't have done this. And he should honestly come out and apologize and correct the record. Because he said something at the end there that's insanely off base. And I feel like he would know it if he did any research or cared to get the right answer.